And joining us for a roundtable today, Washington Times columnist Tim Constantine. He's also the host of the Capitol Hill Show, and David Goodfriend, former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Pleasure to have you as always.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Tim, let's start with you. We were talking about Donald Trump earlier today. He was talking about Ted Cruz. We've heard a lot of the word lie and liars out there on the campaign trail. Has the South Carolina primary been more punishing than even you anticipated?
It's been pretty rough, and it's no holds barred, but I get a kick out of it because what Trump says and what he does are two different things. He's criticizing Ted Cruz, saying he holds a Bible in one hand and does something in the other. Trump has been in a church more times in the past 6 or 8 weeks than he's been in the last 20 years. So for him to claim hypocrisy is comical at best. When you played the quote that was supposed to be from him, and it was an Iceman of Donald Trump telling stories, I thought, I don't know, there are no coincidences. Maybe you got it right.
Yeah, well, maybe perhaps there was some Freudian things going on with our switcher back there in the control room. But David, let's bring you into this conversation. As we pointed out, the attacks in this Right to Rise ad and the Ted Cruz ad are also things that have been used in prior ads trying to take out Donald Trump. It doesn't seem to work. The rules of hypocrisy, the rules of lying, they don't seem to apply to him. This doesn't seem like it's going to work either.
Yeah, it seems to me as though the Republican field is vying for second place. It's almost like they've decided that Trump is going to win, and the real question is who's going to be the establishment candidate. I think under the theory that the establishment candidate could somehow consolidate the support of all the others who are against Trump, and I'm not sure that that theory will hold true. I mean, if the number of choices are reduced for Republican primary voters, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody who didn't vote for Trump before is now going to vote for somebody else. He may attract some of the voters of any of the other candidates. So the attacks on Trump, I think, are premised on a theory that Bush and Rubio and Cruz and the others are vying for who's going to be number two. But I don't think the logic then falls that person is suddenly going to assume the votes of everyone else and take the majority. That is yet to be proven.
Mm. Tim, I feel like we ask this all the time, but it seems like no matter what Trump says or does, his poll numbers are still going through the roof, as John just mentioned. We talked about his latest poll numbers. He's on top, clearly ahead of everyone else. He's even earned the name Teflon Trump. So I'm going to ask you, as a conservative, is there anything that can stop him?
Well, last week in the debate, he was terrible. He was rude, he hollered,
his numbers
and so on.
went up.
Exactly. The numbers go up. The folks that like Donald Trump like the attitude. They are not driven by a particular issue. They're not driven by abortion or by the economy. They are driven by an anger at our government, and they really relate to that. So I think the biggest thing the only thing I can think of that is going to be an immediate or huge detriment to Trump is if he has the moment. If you remember the gentleman, Clady Williams, that ran against Ann Richardson for governor in Texas about 25, 30 years ago, he had like a 20-point lead going into the last 10 days. And then he said something about an issue being akin to rape, that if it's going to happen, you may as well sit back and relax and enjoy it. And that was the moment where Clady Williams' polls went. He lost to Ann Richardson by 20 points. He lost like 30 points in 10 days. Barring something like that, it's going to have to get down to a one-on-one race.
It's not going to happen because there's nothing that Donald Trump could say at this point that would shock anybody. I mean, I don't want to say nothing, but there's almost nothing that he could say at this point that would shock anybody.
I'm not sure. Can I jump in here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Donald Trump has been very carefully cultivating this image of the outsider. And I think something that could completely blow that up is not something outrageous that he says, but rather some evidence that what he's really been doing is like every other establishment politician and every other establishment business person. I mean, to me, it's the wizardry of Donald Trump is that he's a billionaire businessman, much in the same mold as Mitt Romney, but he's managed rhetorically to take on the image of the everyman. And if that gets blown up, if he really turns out to be just Mitt Romney in an orange hairdo, then I think that could really collapse his tent. It's not going to be because he has said something outrageous, but just the opposite. That he turns out to be just another establishment figure. That could hurt him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the polling on something as just out of the voters' normal frame of conscience is like eminent domain. It does not line up well with GOP voters. They don't like the idea of eminent domain. He's unabashed about, oh yes, this happened. It's part of business. I don't think, I don't, even that, David, even that scenario, I don't think there's anything he could even do really that hasn't been exposed about his past that would shock voters and say, you know what, I'll take a pass on Donald Trump. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, well, look, all indications are that he's going to keep winning these pluralities, and that's, for the states that have proportional delegate assignments, that means he's going to get not a majority, but just a plurality. But there are some winner-take-all states coming up.
Yeah.
If he even gets 30% or 33% in those states and gets all the delegates, that starts to introduce a scenario where he really might get the number of delegates. What I'm really interested in, though, where I think this could get really fascinating, is if we have a brokered convention, a brokered Republican convention. That would be democracy at work for sure, but we'd see some horse trading unlike anything we could possibly imagine.
We get closer to that. We get closer to that every second. Every second.
Yep.
David, stick around. We still have a lot more to talk about. Coming up in part 2 of our roundtable, Donald Trump tones down his attacks on George W. Bush in the Iraq War, kind of. Coming up, we'll talk about what he now says and whether or not it will have any bearing on either the Jeb or Trump campaign, and see which political headlines made last night's punchlines when Newsmax Now continues. Donald Trump appears to be walking back some comments he made about former President George W. Bush during the debate last weekend.
I don't know if he lied or not. I just know there were no weapons of mass destruction. I know that his CIA and various other agencies knew that something bad was going to happen, that they did nothing about it.
Now, during Saturday night's debate, Trump claimed the Bush administration lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, but he stopped short of actually accusing W himself of lying to get the country into war in the Middle East. But yesterday, Trump attacked Jeb Bush. He told radio host Mike Gallagher there is still plenty of blame to go around.
You can't say your brother kept us safe, because after the World Trade Center, the World Trade Center came down during his reign. And frankly, there was a lot of information that the CIA and the NSA, you had a lot of different agencies that were poorly coordinated because they could have found out about this.
Now, Trump was booed heavily, as you may recall, by the debate crowd after he accused George W. Bush's administration of lying. The former president is still held in high regard, though, in South Carolina.
All right, let's welcome back in our roundtable guest for part 2. Joining us again, Washington Times columnist Tim Constantine. He's also the host of the Capitol Hill Show on a radio near you. And also David Goodfriend, former Deputy Staff Secretary to President Bill Clinton, back with us for round 2. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
And let's start with you. Is it a good idea to attack a former president, especially one who's still very well liked in South Carolina? Because I have to say, when I heard that, I was shocked.
Shocked.
Yes.
I think particularly when that president was in the party that you're asking to nominate you, that's probably a mistake. If you pick on Barack Obama, you pick on Bill Clinton, that's fair game if you're running for the Republican nomination. But when you start picking on the star of your own team, even if he did have his issues, there's no good side to that. There is nobody within the Republican Party that says, yeah, let's beat up our own guy. It's a bad strategy.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's listen to what George W. Bush had to say in response to Trump a little bit last night while stumping for Jeb in South Carolina.
There seems to be a lot of name calling going on, but I want to remind you what our good dad told me one time. Labels are for soup cans. The presidency is a serious job that requires sound judgment and good ideas. Strength is not empty rhetoric. It is not bluster. It is not theatrics. Real strength, strength of purpose, comes from integrity and character. And in my experience, the strongest person usually isn't the loudest one in the room.
Maybe it's just nostalgia for a simpler time, but when you look at George W. Bush up there on the stump, you think, first of all, how much better he is at the stump than Jeb is. Number two, he sounds so presidential up there. A lot of these same attacks, if you want to call them that he's throwing in the direction of Donald Trump have been thrown in Trump's direction before. My question for you, though, is Tim or David. I can't remember who we had last. Let's start with David.
David, yeah.
Does it sound different coming from a former president? Do you think this can actually make it stick? Not just the man, but the office he once held?
Well, South Carolina is a different pond, let's say, than the rest of the country. I mean, putting George W. Bush up on the dais in Ohio or in Colorado, you might not really be well advised to do that. But in South Carolina, where he beat John McCain when they were running against each other in that primary, where he is well liked, I think it's certainly a way of trying to elevate Jeb Bush above the fray and make him look a little bit more official. But again, it's like, if you're on the battlefield and someone's attacking from your left side, what they're doing here and running to the right just doesn't make any sense. I mean, they're trying to attack Trump with more kind of traditional presidential characteristics. That just is not what's making Trump win in the first place. It's almost proving his point. Here he is saying, I'm running against all of that history and I'm running against the Republican Party establishment. And what do? They bring out the biggest establishment figure of them all.
He says he's happy to wear that crown. If being president of the United States makes him a member of the establishment, he's happy to do that. Tim?
Well, Jeb Bush has also said, I'm for Common Core and illegal immigrants should all be granted,
a big hug.
Amnesty. So none of those, when you talk establishment or those other issues, none of those are selling to the rank and file. None of those are selling to the Republican Party. So, God bless him for saying it, but he's not going to run away from his family. He loves his brother. He loves his dad. He loves his mom. God bless him. I love my family too. But when we look here, America is frustrated. America is angry. And I'll give you just one example. I was sitting down with Reince Priebus like a week before the 2014 election. We did a televised interview. And one of the things he assured me, Tim, if we could just have control of that Senate again, we'll roll back Obamacare. We'll do this, we'll do that. He had his long list of what they would do, none of which has been achieved. And Republicans feel betrayed. Why Donald Trump is doing well is there is a full third, maybe more, of the party that is just sick and tired of all the nonsense. They don't believe it anymore. And so they would rather go for that bluster. They'd rather express the anger that way than go for whomever is saying the right thing at the right time.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to say something here about
30
Donald
seconds,
Trump.
Dave.
Don't forget that he appeals to a certain populist sentiment on the left as well. When he talks about jobs and trade and the working class, that resonates with union members, that resonates with progressives. They may not want to admit it, but you don't hear that kind of rhetoric coming from other Republican candidates. So instead of labeling this as Republican or Democratic, there's an element of class here.
Right. And that's why so many Republicans have hit him for sounding like Michael Moore, and that doesn't necessarily be working too well against Donald Trump, like anything else. David Goodfriend, Tim Constantine, gentlemen, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, more to come here on Newsmax Now after this.